Now we have the second panel presentation on theological education for consecrated women with a question, a luxury or a need in our times. And this will be handled by Sister Shalini Mulackal, a convinced and committed theologian, inclusive and inspiring in her approach. And I'm proud to recall the fact that Sister Shalini had been the first woman president of Indian Theological Association. And as we initiate a discussion on ecclesiastical education today, I hope that Sister Shalini is not the last one, that there would be many more from among the consecrated women to lead Indian Theological Association. Now let's look at the challenging perspective of Sister Shalini, whether theological education is a luxury or a need for consecrated women. Over to you, Sister Shalini.
Thank you, Father Saju. Am I audible?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My co-panelists and as well as the participants of this online symposium. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers of this online symposium, especially Father Saju Chakalekar CMI, for giving me an opportunity to reflect and share with you my thoughts on the given topic, theological education for consecrated women, a luxury or a need in our times. Let me begin with my own life story. I am moving away from the first panelist. I want to base from my own experience as a woman, as a consecrated woman. So after completing my degree course, I taught in one of our schools in Goa for almost 4 years. And then I was sent to do B.Ed. I was also asked soon after B.Ed, I could go for LLB, since I felt deeply called to work at the grassroots with the people made poor. Even before completing my B.Ed, I got a letter from my provincial leader at that time, informing me about some changes with regard to my future studies. And so she asked me to go for BTH instead of LLB. I was thoroughly disappointed with this change. At that moment, I could not understand what is the use of a degree in theology, especially for my mission with the poor. I even wondered why the provincial is asking me to waste my 3 precious years in studying something I considered at that time as very abstract and useless. Since I had no valid reason for not going, I accepted to go for BTH. However, after a week of attending the classes in Vidya Jyoti, I was forced to change my stand about the usefulness of theology for my mission. The first course I still remember was on Introduction to Theology and Socio-Cultural Analysis, taken by Father T.K. John. And then we were taken to the slums, to Jantar Mandar, the protest site in Delhi, the parliament, etc. We were taken for many protest marches as part of doing theology. So after a week, I felt that I am on the right track, and theology is far from abstract and useless, but it is very concrete and useful for my ministry among the marginalized. And so that is the first part of my experience. Second part of my experience, just last month, I was called to take some classes for the AC Sisters Tertians in Mangalore. They had many questions that was not related to the topic I was handling. Their questions were related to Christian faith, the Christian life, understanding of Christian ethics and morality, etc. And they told me they had been asking these questions to some of the professors who came before me, but they were not, they were not convinced or they were not satisfied with such answers. The young sisters felt that they were not able to answer the questions of young people, family people today in a way that is satisfying and appealing to their reason. I was happy that Father Jose talked about faith and reason being the two wings. And therefore, today young people are looking for the explanation of Christian faith that is appealing to their reason. And the sisters found it very, very difficult to handle such a situation. And they were asking me some of these questions, how to answer when such a question comes from the young people. I myself remember that I too encountered such unexpected questions from today's youth. I remember a few years ago in my own school here in Delhi, I was asked to give a session to all the Christian students of standard 8 to 12th. And I was really surprised. One of them asked me, got up and said, "Sister, can you please explain to us, how do we understand the concept of God, our Christianity, concept of God as Trinity? Three distinct persons in one. Can you explain?" For a moment, I was a little kind of, I don't know, how do I explain to these, students who have no theological or philosophical background? And how do I handle that question? How do I make sensible, how do I make them understand in their own language, in their own, metaphors that they can understand at their level? And I remember somehow, because of my theological background, I was able to kind of communicate with them how I understand, how I make sense out of God as Trinity. And the girl who asked the question, she profoundly thanked me, "Sister, I am so very happy. I never heard this explanation before." What am I trying to say through all these examples so far? We live in an entirely different world than the one most of us were familiar with or we were born into. It is not easy to make sense out of all that is happening in and around us, and it is happening so rapidly. We live in a world which is run by capitalistic ideology by most of the world, creating a culture of materialism, use and throw culture, and profit motivation. What is important in today's world is making profit by any means. Religion and God are relegated to the private sphere of human existence. Religion is seen purely as your private affair, private matter. You practice it privately. It is in this context that consecrated people are called to be radical disciples of Jesus, living the gospel values which are contrary to the values which are held high in our present day society. Are consecrated people, especially women, ready and are prepared to face today's challenges? First of all, let us recall what consecrated life is all about. Sorry for kind of, going back. Most of us know what consecrated life, but I thought, at this moment, a little bit going back is good to keep, our discussion meaningful and coherent. When we look at consecrated life in the church, I would trace its origin in the early church. We know that there were virgins and widows who consecrated their life to God. Young women were allowed to dedicate their entire life for the service of God if they so wished without getting married. Widows who did not want to remarry were dedicated in a similar way. After Emperor Constantine accepted Christianity as a state religion, we know the Christian living became so diluted. The age of persecution was over. Bishops and priests in the church enjoyed special privileges in the Constantine period. It is in this situation that some felt a deep call to leave the gospel radically, and so they escaped into the desert. We have the desert fathers and desert mothers who left everything and were in search of God. And they really wanted to live the gospel in its radicality. Gradually, monastic life began with community living. Religious life or consecrated life took various phases in its journey so far. Saint Benedict gave the rule for common living. Saint Francis of Assisi embraced lady poverty as part of this life of consecration. Saint Dominic added the aspect of taking faith formation or preaching the gospel to the ordinary people on the streets. When consecrated life entered the phase of apostolic religious life, various founders of religious orders of both men and women responded to various social needs of their time. Many responded to the cry of the poor and started to serve people in need. Whatever form consecrated life took in different times, certain basic elements remained in this form of life. Intense search for God, or the desire to be in union with God, is the most basic aspects of this form of life. Living in community and serving people in need were also very much part of consecrated life all along. Today we talk of consecrated life as a sign of the reign of God. Our mission is to further the reign which Jesus proclaimed and inaugurated and lived in his own life and in his own words. In other words, consecrated persons are living witnesses to the person of Jesus. They are set apart to be countersigns in this world, especially of today's world. They are called to live their Christian faith in a radical way. And there was a time when women religious completely dependent on the clergy, both secular and religious, for their faith formation. If you go back to 50 years, 100 years, they were totally dependent. They depended on the clergy for all their spiritual needs, like spiritual direction, celebration of sacraments, retreats, you can name anything. And they had to depend on the clergy. Maybe about 100 or more years ago, women were not allowed to study theology or sacred scriptures or enrolled to study theology. It is with the awakening of the feminist consciousness in the late 19th century that women were given permission gradually to study theology. Ever since, we have at least some women doing theological studies so that they can form and train their younger members in the congregation. It is in this context that we need to inquire about what theology is all about. We talked about consecrated life is living our Christian faith radically. And so how do we understand theology and theological education? The word, as most of us know, theology comes from the Greek word theos plus logos, meaning, already Father Jose mentioned, God talk, talking about God. According to Saint Anselm, theology is faith seeking understanding. A classical definition of theology still holds true in our time. That takes us to the next question. What is faith, or what is Christian faith? Christian faith is the human response to God, who reveals God's self in a perfect way through Jesus Christ, especially through Jesus' death and resurrection. And at the baptism, each Christian proclaims his or her belief in God through Jesus. So according to Saint Anselm, theology is our effort to understand the faith we have received, so that by understanding in a deeper way, we may be able to live our faith with a deeper and deeper commitment. So we need theological education to understand our faith and thus to deepen our faith in God. And already we said, consecrated life began as an intense search for God. And therefore, all the more it makes sense that we understand our Christian faith deeply. This deeper understanding is enhanced by the study of Bible, where God's revelation to humanity is unfolded. Without a deep understanding of God and our faith, we cannot be effective witnesses of our faith. and also in a challenging world of ours. And theology really aims at transformation of oneself and transformation of society in which we live. Theological education helps one to interpret the world from God's perspective, already mentioned by the first panelist, Father Jose, looking at God, everything through the eyes of God. It is like putting on the spectacles of God and looking at everything and makes meaning out of what is going on. Theology helps us to make sense even in the most difficult situations. In other words, theological education equips one to answer the complex questions we are faced within today's world. For instance, how do we make sense out of the present war that is going on between Ukraine or the aggression of Russia over Ukraine? Where do we find God in such evil and violent situations as we see in Palestine and the colonial occupation of Israel in Palestinian land? How do we make sense out of various sorts of suffering in the world? Untimely deaths, natural calamities, exploitation and oppression of one group over another. How do we discern what God is calling each one in such situations? Deeper theological reflection helps one to find meaning and purpose even in the darkest times. As I mentioned earlier, till recently, women were kept out of the study of theology. They had to depend on the clergy for everything. Women had to be content with the explanation, interpretation that came purely from a male view of the world and from male experiences. Theological education enables women to understand God from their own experiences as women. We know that both male and female are different in their perspectives and experiences. In order to have a more holistic understanding of God, we need both men and women talking about God from their own particular respective experiences and standpoints. We are aware how even today in our Indian society, women are given an inferior status. The same situation is found in our church. Though we are equal in dignity before God, as Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 affirms, in reality, men are more equal than women, to use the expression of George Orwell. Women still suffer from internalized patriarchal values and attitudes. Even consecrated women are not liberated from this internal colonization. As long as consecrated women are not theologically equipped, their inferior status in the church will remain. We know that knowledge is power. Theological knowledge will empower consecrated women to a large extent. If consecrated women are called for a special mission in the church, it is imperative that they understand their faith in a deeper way through their own experiences. Being leaders in the church, they need to help others, especially those entrusted to their care. Some may ask whether it is really possible to have all our members theologically educated. Already so many years are spent on secular education. Can we really afford to spend more money and time in theologically educating our members? Even though I know that it is difficult, it is not so much practical, yet we need to find a way out. I am not suggesting that each and everyone should go for a BTH, but maybe we need to relook at our formation. Can we focus a bit more preparing our members to interpret the world in the light of our Christian faith throughout our formative period? Can we think of a formation which will help the candidates to religious life understand their Christian faith better? In the light of all that I have shared, I think Theological education is no more a luxury meant for a few women religious, but it is a must to live our Christian call and all the more our religious vocation meaningfully in today's world. Thank you.